So let's focus today on rentals. This is one of our most frequently asked questions. If I'm ready to move to a place, what do I do when I land to find a rental before I look for a long-term rental or before I purchase a place? And there's so many iterations of how this can work. So when it comes to looking in Belize, how should you start your search when it comes to looking for a rental? All right. Welcome everyone to the Live and Invest Overseas YouTube channel. I am Kat Kalashian. And with me today is Sharon Lord, a Belize expat based in San Pedro. Tell us a little bit about yourself, please, Sharon.
So I moved from Phoenix, August of 2024 with my husband and three cats to San Pedro, which we've been visiting for 10 years. We bought a home 2 years ago that we put in the rental pool, but we just fell in love with the island. The food, the culture, the people are so fantastic. This was always our goal to move here. And now I'm happy to share the information that I've learned over many, many visits and now living here full time.
Awesome. Yes. And that's what we're always looking for, those insider insights. So let's focus today on rentals. This is one of our most frequently asked questions. If I'm ready to move to a place, what do I do when I land to find a rental before I look for a long-term rental or before I purchase a place? And there's so many iterations of how this can work. So when it comes to looking in Belize, how should you start your search when it comes to looking for a rental?
The biggest challenge is figuring out where in the country you want to live. It's only the size of roughly Massachusetts. However, it's so diverse. There's so many different areas and nuances to the country. So my first step is determine where you want to live. Definitely visit all the areas that you're considering first. Seeing it online is very different from being there 24/7. So to have boots on the ground and, see and touch and feel the area, the amenities, the conveniences, and make sure you're comfortable with them. For
Hmm.
Belize, I would say that there's, four different areas. The mountains, which are going to be, towards the western side by Guatemala, more remote, more holistic, more of that kind of like off-grid hippie feel. You have mainland cities like San Ignacio, Santa Elena, Belmopan. So inland, have your usual grocery stores, all your modern conveniences. You have coastal cities, which are going to be like Hopkins, Placencia, or Corozal. You have the ocean, but you still have the convenience of being on the mainland. And you'll have,
Hmm.
more tourism in those areas than the first two. And then my last option, or I should say fourth, I'm not doing them in order of preference, would be the Keys Islands. So like Ambergris Key or Key Cocker. Obviously, being on an island, cost of living is going to be a little higher and you have more tourism, but you live on an island in the tropics. So you really kind of have to feel out those areas and determine what's best for you.
So I'm interested in drawing out some of the differences in lifestyle between all of those kinds of lifestyle options, which definitely are the main lifestyle options we always try and hit. So I mean, I've spent a good deal of time in Belize. I know it pretty well, and it can get very rustic. So the first thing to be aware of is that if you are looking on the mainland, really anywhere you're looking, but especially on the mainland, especially if you're looking into these more remote mountain areas, you're going to be living a much less amenity filled life in terms of, most homes don't have AC, for example. I've been to lots of self sufficient communities where the homes have been built to make the most of wind direction and, making sure that things are not getting too hot all the time, but they don't use air conditioning. So if you want air conditioning, I mean, I would say the islands are pretty well air conditioned. Is that your experience as well?
It is. Again, touristy areas, they want to accommodate the visitors that come in, so they want to make it
Hmm.
comfortable. So, islands, I would say 95% of the short-term rentals, or I'm sorry, long-term rentals will have air conditioning. Mini splits are a big thing down here, just, individual
Hmm.
room air conditioners. They're much more energy efficient. Like our villa that we live in had central air. We took it out and put in mini splits, and our bill went from 700 Belize to 200 Belize a month.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's
That's
don't
huge.
you
I
know
had no
it's
idea.
something that North Americans aren't really used to,
Hmm.
but it's amazing. It's you can determine which areas of the room or the house you want to AC at that specific time. But yeah, definitely air conditioning more common in coastal cities or the Keys, just because you have more
Mhm.
tourists.
Right, exactly. More foreign influence. So the basic idea I want to get across is that your standards will change to some degree, maybe to a lesser degree on the Keys or the islands than it would be on the mainland. What are some of the other differences that people will see, say in construction standards, building materials, things like that? Are there any kind of shocks that people would not be expecting?
That my background is real estate. I worked for home builders for 27 years, and I'm used to, basements or slab construction, stick frame build, central air conditioning. Everything is so different here. So for your home structures, you're either going to be entirely wood, which by the way, the tropics have termites. So heads up on that. Uh, or it's going to be concrete, so cinder block. Sometimes they fill it with a concrete core. Concrete obviously stays much warmer. It absorbs the sun's heat over the day, but it's more sturdy. So if you're in an area prone to hurricanes or tropical storms, having concrete construction is definitely preferred. Although typically landlords know that and will charge a little bit of a premium for a concrete home over wood construction.
Interesting. Okay, good to know. And of course, budget is always a factor. And again, this always goes back to the more frequented areas, the places where there are more tourists, more foreigners, whether they're living or visiting. So, what is your advice when it comes to figuring a rental budget when you're just in the absolute first stages of looking at coming to rent short or long term in Belize?
Yeah, I definitely talk to folks that are living there and get a feel for their utility bills, what they're paying for gas. Do they have a vehicle? If so, what's the maintenance and upkeep on that? Make sure you have your whole big picture and don't just micro focus on housing alone, because it all
Mhm.
does factor in. You want to make sure you're comfortable. You don't want to have to move a bunch or realize you've overspent on rent and can't afford to go out to eat or enjoy where you live now. So I say you really look at your complete budget, understand that you may pay the same as what you're paying in North America, specifically in the Keys, just because the cost of living is a little higher, but you'll have the North American amenities that you're used to. So I think just, keep that balance in mind between what you're spending and what you're getting and what you're comfortable with.
Yes, absolutely. This is something we bring up because we'll get emails from people to say, "Well, you're telling me I could, reduce my budget living in X countries." So in this case, we'll talk about Belize, but the rents there are much higher than the rents in Ohio or Oklahoma or, someplace in middle America. Well, of course they are. This is tropical beachfront living. You are exactly, look at this. This is what you're getting. Compare apples to apples. These are not the same apples. These apples are of an entirely different caliber. So keep that in mind and always give yourself that reality check of, where I was living in the US or Canada or wherever else. Does that actually compare line by line to the new life I'm getting? And in so many ways, no matter where you're moving, whether it's Belize or Portugal or anywhere, we always say, your lifestyle is almost sure to improve, and your budget can be whatever you want it to be. It can be much lower. You can pinch pennies and live much cheaper, especially living like a local, or you can spend the same amount or even more than you are back home. But again, the lifestyle is not what you're living back home. So keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
Right. So our number one question when it comes to real estate overseas, and this has more to do with the sales side of things than the rental side of things, but it all ties in, the MLS system. It doesn't exist outside of America. So what do you do when you're looking for a good agent to work with? Do you have to have multiple agents, multiple agencies? How do you figure this out?
So it's one of the most frequently asked questions on some of the Facebook groups that I'm in is, we want to move here, but we don't know there's no MLS, there's no realtor.com, there's like no source, a one-stop shop for finding a long-term
Yeah.
rental. So, a lot of long-term rentals happen by word of mouth. So if you happen to be in the area you're looking at for your bartender, your server, people you see, volunteering, just anyone you can talk to and just ask them, hey, do you know of any long-term rental properties or a landlord or someone who has, space to rent? Online, unfortunately, a lot of the property manager websites have outdated information. Property isn't available anymore. It isn't in their pool, but they aren't very up to date with their listings. They'll just kind of float out there years and years after they've
Mhm.
been leased or aren't even available anymore. So unfortunately, the internet is not very reliable as far as looking for a long-term rental.
Which is a huge tip because I think as North Americans, we are very spoiled and very used to everything being available online, being able to do everything via email. So I'm for background, I'm based in France, so I'm not in Latin America, but the rest of the world, whether you're looking south of the border, across the Atlantic, the rest of the world does not function the same way that North America does when everything can be done by email, and where you can find out everything that you need to do by going to house.com or these MLS websites. There's a lot more legwork involved, and so word of mouth is definitely, in my experience, one of the best ways, no matter what country you're in, to find out about rentals and also sales. Also, just walking around, driving your car, looking for those signs posted up. They may look like they have been there for 10 years, but weather in the tropics, it might have only been there a week. So don't take that for granted. If you're wandering around and you see a really cool house or a really beautiful building or a lovely piece of property and it has a sign outside, write down that phone number and give them a call. And it's made all the easier in Belize because Belize is an English speaking country. Most of the countries we talk about, it's not quite that easy, and we would say have a local make that call for you. But here in Belize, at least, you're all on the same language playing field. Okay, so back to the main point. How does one actually, you're in the country, maybe you found your medium term Airbnb or whatever it is, whether it's through word of mouth or the internet, and then you're looking for a long-term rental, which is the next step that we always advise. So how do we go about it then with no realtor.com website?
So what I would do is contact property managers directly. You're going to have to call them or WhatsApp them. They're not going to respond to emails, but pick up the phone and call them, find out what they have available, tell them what you're looking for. Do this far in advance because they don't have a lot of urgency. You may have to do a lot more follow-up than you're used to. It's island time or tropic time, Belize time.
Just frankly, just not America. It's the same in Europe.
Yeah. Okay. Join Facebook groups in the areas that you're looking at. Like for me, we have San Pedro short-term rentals, Everest Key rental properties. Just kind of put in those kind of keywords in the search function in Facebook, and groups will pop up. Join them all. It's not going to hurt. I've seen some amazing listings on there that I would never have known about if I weren't on those groups. Even though I'm not even looking for a long-term rental, I'm just always curious to see what's going on. And again, word of mouth, start talking to folks, see who knows what. And sorry, I have a puddle jumper flying over.
We can't hear it on our end.
Okay. It was really loud. Getting out and talking to folks, you'll eventually find a property that will work for you.
Okay, great. All right. So now you found your rental in our hypothetical situation. What's going to be different, perhaps shocking, even, what is comparable to the US or Canada and what might be a little bit different? How should we prepare ourselves for a long-term lease in Belize?
This one's totally new to me, is that most places come, if not fully furnished, at least partially furnished. That may even include kitchenwares and linens and everything. So it's really tough
for a
to
long term. That is odd. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Specifically on the island, it's really tough to move. There's not moving trucks. Most people are transported by golf carts. So if you think of having to move
great point.
dressers and beds, like it's going to be many, many, many golf cart trips. So don't pack everything in the kitchen sink until you know for sure where you're going to end up, because odds are it's going to be at least have your core furniture, if not everything. It's rare to find a rental that allows pets. So definitely, if you are moving with pets, start your search way far in advance, because there's a very small sliver of long-term rentals that allow you to bring pets. Belizeans just don't value domesticated animals like we do in North America. So you're unlikely to find a large pool of rentals that will allow you to bring a pet. If they do, it may be one small dog. If you have a pet, definitely make it a priority. It's just like that search early to make sure your furry family members can come with you.
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually,
it's funny because
on the other
properties than you would have in North.
Sorry, there's a delay between us, so
Oh, go ahead.
no, I was just going to make the point that in Belize, one of the tips that we've often made about safety, especially in remote areas, is that Belizeans don't love dogs. So
Mm,
if you have a big dog, doesn't need to be a trained guard dog or even a particularly scary dog, but if you have a dog on your property, you're going to be at the bottom of the list if there is any burglarizing or home invasions that are an issue. Not to say that is an issue in Belize, but that dogs are probably the number one security system in Belize because yeah, locals just don't like dogs that much.
absolutely. And really, even a medium-sized dog, a 40-pounder is intimidating enough that most people will walk past it and not mess with your
Exactly.
property
Yeah, they'll cross the street to pass your property.
to avoid it. Yes.
Yeah.
Other changes or other things that are different is it's very rare to find 3-bedroom or more long-term rental properties. There just isn't a lot of inventory. So, when my husband and I moved, we had a 4-bedroom, 4-bath house in Phoenix. You'll have to scale down. So just know
Mhm.
that, if you're used to 3 bedrooms and a den or having more space to spread out between, the cost of construction materials and utilities, it's much more common to find 2 bedrooms. So just be prepared for that. And then some rentals will include utilities, which is different from North America as well. Be sure to ask because that obviously factors into your budget. If they're your responsibility, they'll probably stay in your landlord's name just because it's so difficult for non-Belizeans to set up utilities in their name. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. So 9 times out of 10, the landlord will just keep them in their name and then you just make those payments.
Well, that seems actually easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the hard question now about price comparisons between, the most popular places in Belize versus the what one might be used to in the U.S. People always want to have a very specific number. Of course, this always depends on, as we've said, the amenities, the location, and the size, which is almost always going to be smaller no matter what. I mean, right, you said Belize is the size of Massachusetts. There aren't going to be little McMansions everywhere to buy. So you also need to scale down your thinking when you think of a rental figure. It's not going to be the rental figure that you're imagining for a very large 5-bedroom villa. This is a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment or condo or small house. So can you give us some idea of how to compare the rental figures?
There's a handy little table that we'll put on the screen just so you can kind of match
Voila.
up. And the way I broke it up was the 4 locations that I spoke about at the beginning of our interview. And then I
Hmm.
did 3 different categories for the standards because they will vary. Simple is going to be, basic shelter, probably not going to have air conditioning, probably a wood structure.
Okay.
Um, then you have like a local, which maybe wood or concrete. It will probably have AC in some areas, maybe just bedrooms with those mini splits. Not top of the line appliances, but appliances, everything functions. And there's the North American standards, and those are going to be what you're used to in America or Canada, standstill appliances and everything up to date, concrete construction. So if we're looking at the mountains or remote area, simple is going to be that 300 to 400 to North American 700 to 900. But there's not going to be many of those properties in the mountains because there's not a big draw for it. I won't go through and read each one with the graphic. You can kind of look at them and crunch the
Yeah, get an
numbers
idea.
yourself. And there's notes for the coastal cities and the Keys that there will be a premium if it's an oceanfront unit above those listed
Of
prices.
course. Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah.
there's only so much shoreline, and that's where everyone would prefer to live. So landlords understand they can charge a premium for those locations.
Yeah. Still, I mean, I know we always say the keys can be as much as you were spending back home. 1800 at the very, very top end of this standard. 1800 to me sounds like a massive bargain on rent. I know I'm over here in Paris, one of the most expensive cities in the world, but still, I mean, right. Oceanfront, North American standards, central air conditioning, doorman building, if it's a condo kind of thing. This seems like quite a bargain to me. And so I'm trying to remind us all what we're getting for the amount that you're spending.
And that's for a 2-bedroom, 1 bath or a 2-bedroom, 2 bath, which is
Okay.
probably like the most targeted for folks moving to Belize is they want, enough room to be comfortable, maybe a guest bedroom, but not, so big that it's
Right.
either hard to
Right.
find
Why run air
or more than they
conditioning?
need. So
why run air conditioning in rooms you don't need to use every day? So it makes perfect sense to me. All right, let's get down into the not quite so fun stuff of, for example, how do you actually pay rent? I lived in Panama for 7 years, and over the course of the 10, my boyfriend, now husband, lived there for 10 years. And over the course of the 10 years, the way to pay rent or utilities or pay your bills in general evolved quite rapidly over the years that we were there. So I'm curious, in Belize, for example, can you do a direct deposit every month? Or, can you have it automatically sent via your online banking system? Or how else are you actually physically paying the money every month?
It will mostly depend on who your landlord is. If it is a North American citizen, you can probably Zelle or set up an automatic direct bank transfer. If your landlord is Belize based only, you'll probably have to pay in cash until you can set up a local bank account. That again is a lot of hoops to jump through, a lot of checks and balances. Belize is very attuned to money laundering, so they want to
Oh,
ensure
yeah.
that the money that's transferring is for the right reasons
For
and
the
not
purpose. Yep.
right, and not anything nefarious. So it may take months, or you may even have to wait until you have permanent residency in order to set up a Belizean bank account. So in that case, you're probably going to be taking cash to your landlord or property manager. Sorry,
Okay.
a little
I'm
more lower
curious,
tech.
we hadn't discussed this prior, but are rental figures typically quoted in Belize dollars or US dollars? Because we haven't actually addressed the currency issue, which really isn't an issue for Belize
Mhm.
because they've pegged their
So
dollar
it's
to the
funny
US dollar.
at 2 to 1. So two Belize dollars is one US dollar. Oddly enough, real estate is the only thing that is typically quoted in US pricing. So whether that's sale or rent, presume that it is US dollars unless you see a BZ after the amount, then it's
Right.
Belizean.
Right, because your habit will become to cut everything in half. Every time you go into a store,
Right.
every time you see a price tag, you cut it in half, knowing that it's 2 to 1. In this case, make sure you don't do that unless you're really, really sure that it should be cut in half. Okay, that's great. Let's see. Any other advice, just general best insider tips for people looking to move in your experience or the experience of those around you? What might people want to know that they don't know already?
you know, Definitely visit for a long duration, at least a month. Stay in a short-term rental in the area you're considering moving. Ideally in low season, the rates will be lower. It'll be quieter. Property managers will have more time to spend with clients. So you'll have a better experience and more one-on-one time with the property managers. Figure out your target area, make personal connections. If you happen to find a place while you're there on your short-term visit, great. Go home and get your stuff and move. If not, your personal connections can keep you in touch, keep in touch with you and update you like,
Mhm.
oh, our neighbor just put their house for rent, or, my cousin has a home that's coming available. So they can always update you as it gets closer to your move date. If you do have to sign a lease sight unseen, which I highly suggest against, don't sign a long lease. Odds are the photos you're being shown are older or edited. Even a video walkthrough might not give you the most accurate vision of what the property currently looks like.
Mhm.
And not being there, you might not know that, the neighbor has 8 dogs that bark all night, or you're in the flight path of the airport. There's so
Mhm.
much that you can learn by being boots on the ground and being there and seeing, touching, feeling it. Probably my last tip is to be flexible. You may have to compromise on amenities or location or availability dates, or even price, just because there's a smaller pool of available properties. At least it's not forever, and it's much less commitment than a purchase. So it's kind of a try before you buy and make sure you're comfortable with
Absolutely.
it. But as much research as you can do on the front end, it'll make your move and living in Belize much smoother.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually have a story that speaks to the sight unseen thing, which ironically it wasn't sight unseen. He had been to visit this home, which was next door to a church, which you would think would be a perfectly respectable neighbor to have. However, he only visited during the day, and apparently at night the church was more of a community center, which was really more of a disco at night. And they actually had loudspeakers on their roof, which were generally used to toll the bells and let everybody know that mass was on. But at night, especially on the weekend nights or holiday nights, those loudspeakers were used for the boom boom bass. And he had no idea that that's what he was going to be living next to. So luckily he was able to move within 3 months. But just goes to show you, especially in Belize, it's a little bit of the wild, wild west. You can't always count on what you think to be the case, will actually be the case. Church, being a disco doesn't really go hand in hand, but there you go. Dogs, roosters, other animals that you may not be used to. If you're living at the corner of an intersection where people like to zoom through at night, little things like that. So, we always say rent before you buy, but definitely, even with a rental, get to know that specific location. You're not moving to Belize, you're moving to a town. And you're not even moving to that town, you're moving to a street. And you're not even moving to that street, you're moving to one side of the street or the other. All of these things can make a more significant difference than you might imagine. So amazing. Thank you so much, Sharon, for sharing these tips with us. This has been a great interview, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
Here, thanks, Kat.